So, now that Murder's at Karlov Manor, and I just said the word, I'm probably going to get demonetized for that one, but now that Karlov Manor is out, we actually have access to a bunch of new cards to play with for budget decks. I wanted to go ahead and talk about the cards I'm most excited to play in the $15 decks, but these are cards that can be used in basically any budget deck, and I think you should probably give them a try yourself if you are also playing Magic the Gathering on a budget. Remember, playing Magic on a budget doesn't mean you're playing a weak deck. It means that you're playing a deck that has a restrictive build environment. As long as you are building within that environment and you're doing well, you should be able to perform at most tables regardless. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the 10 cards that I am most excited to use in decks with the release of Karlov Manor. And let's go ahead and start out with my first favorite one here, Escape Tunnel. We can sack it to get any basic land from our deck onto the battlefield. We can also make target creature with power 2 or less unblockable until end of turn. So, I like this card a ton because I'm already a fan of fetching lands that we don't have to spend a lot of money for. I'm a landfall mechanic guy. I like playing AC, I like playing Tatyova, I like playing Lord Windgrace. So any cards that allow us to play very quick land sacrificing and land grabbing effects, I am all for. You've seen most of my decks by now. I hope you know I'm a big fan of the panoramas. Escape Tunnel gives us a come into tapped option alongside the panoramas that we can play along with the Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds that we were already running. Also, that last effect that it has there that makes a creature with power 2 or less unblockable till end of turn, there are some nutty things you can do with that, a little mini Rogue's Passage you have access to in decks that are going to be repeatedly abusing this card anyway. It's not an unusable line of text on the card, so hopefully, y'all end up giving this card a shot. It should end up working as well, if not better, than your usual options you were already playing in budget decks. We don't have, until the day where Wizards of the Coast gives us $1 Marsh Flats, this is going to be one of the things we get to use for budget decks more often. Now, there's another type of deck I'm a huge fan of, and that is the Aristocrats decks. So we need to talk about Soul Innervation. At flash speed, you can give a creature -4/-4, so you can kill indestructible creatures. And anytime one or more creatures leave your graveyard, every opponent will lose a life and you gain a life. Aristocrat strategies are constantly reanimating cards with things like Vat of Rebirth, Dread Return, and my personal favorite, Altar of Baal. So a card like this is doing double duty as both a kill card that, again, gets around indestructible, while also allowing you the extra utility of a burn card that you can keep around. It's also an enchantment, so enchantment matters cards like Nettlecyst will also gain extra power from this card. It's pulling a lot of weight for its mana cost and what it is. If you are playing a budget Aristocrats deck and you have a strong enough reanimation package, I would say at least 8 cards, unless your commander is a reanimator commander in and of themselves. Give this guy a shot. I think it's going to pull a lot of weight for you and do really, really well. The next card I want to talk about is Polygraph Orb. When Polygraph Orb enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 of your library, put 2 into your hand, and the rest into the grave. You lose 2 life. You can then collect Evidence 3, and then every opponent will lose 3 life unless they discard a card or sack a creature. So it is a repeatable effect we can use in decks like Lorcan to keep putting cards in not only our graveyard to reanimate, but our opponent's graveyards to make them get pushed back and even give them bad decisions. If you're playing something like Lorcan or Tergrid, this is going to force your opponent to almost always choose the lose 3 life option, which gets us closer to winning the game anyway. But the big thing with this card for me is that it is an artifact that lets us look at 4 cards in our deck and put 2 in the graveyard in black. This means in decks like Mishra, where we are able to clone this card about 1 billion times, we're going to be able to see all of our deck using a card like this. This also means in decks like Braids, where we're going to play this, get a draw out of it, and then immediately sacrifice it to Braids for extra value. This card's going to be letting us see about 7 cards into our deck when we play it. The decks that like cloning artifacts, the decks that like blinking artifacts, and the decks that like our opponents losing incremental life like aristocrats, I think are going to benefit a lot from a card like Polygraph Orb. If you have already tried this card in your decks, let me know. I think the best home for this, though, is the Mishra deck we already built. Mishra Eminent One, creating a 4/4 creature version of this every turn, letting you just immediately dig 4 cards into your deck every single time. That is a massive upswing in power for that deck. Next, we have Make Your Move, though. Make Your Move is a 3-mana instant that can blow up an artifact, enchantment, or a creature with power 4 or greater. Now, when you're playing a budget deck, the reason that you want to play something like this is because when you're running budget, you need your cards to pull a lot of weight. They need to be pulling a lot of extra utility. Budget cards tend to cost more mana than things that you are not running on a very, very tight budget. So this needs to be able to be run alongside things like Generous Gift. It's costing the same amount of money as Generous Gift. This gives us more options that are modular for blowing up lots and lots of things on the board. A lot of commanders have power 4 or greater. Artifacts and enchantments are notoriously hard to remove from boards. Make Your Move is a decent alternative to something like Generous Gift or Stroke of Midnight if you are trying to run on a very restrictive budget, and I think it's going to see play in a few of my decks going forward. Keep an eye out for it. Then we have Pick Your Poison. You can choose one. Every opponent sacks an artifact, an enchantment, or a creature with flying. So this can either be used to turn off the dragon player real quick, or more times than not, you're going to be just 1-for-3ing this on artifacts or enchantments. If you do this with artifacts, you can force somebody to get rid of an early game Soul Ring, while other people are being forced to get rid of artifacts that have more value. This card is going to be an interesting pick that's going to make sure that a lot of the board states you're in are forced to make decisions on what they want to get rid of. Most of the time when we see an effect like this, it either gets rid of one type of card, or it's almost always getting rid of creatures. Pick Your Poison, giving us the option to do as many as we want for a solid 1 mana, I think is going to see a decent bit of utility. Then we have Hardhitting Question. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature or planeswalker. So this is a green removal spell we can play for 1 mana that has no real drawbacks. Even some earlier cards like Blizzard Brawl required us to have snow lands to get the full benefit of them. Cards like Hardhitting Question don't have that issue. And because it can attack even a planeswalker and opponent controls, this gives us the ability to get creatures in and over problematic Super Friends decks. I think if you're playing a mono green deck that doesn't have access to a lot of different flavors of removal, Hard-Hitting Question is going to put in a lot of work for you. Then we have Breakout. We can look at the top 6 cards of our library, reveal a creature card from among them, and if that card has mana value 2 or less, you may put that into the battlefield, and then it gains haste until end of turn. If you don't put it in your board, then you can go ahead and put it in your hand instead. So Gruul has a problem in Magic, in that it has one of the best colors for drawing and one of the worst colors for drawing. And all of the drawing in Gruul tends to either be impulse draw, like Ren's Resolve, or things like Return of the Wildspeaker that require you to have a board state already built up. Breakout, the fact that this can, at worst, give us a 2-mana creature on the board that will have haste, and at best, will probably give us a super big, swingy, problematic dude that we can get into our hands. I think it's going to see some play even outside of budget decks, in Gruul decks that really want to dig further and further into their decks for cards, especially because this can get a creature onto the battlefield for free when you need it to. So this can double as a ramp spell for you if you're playing Breakout and getting like a Birds of Paradise or a Llanowar Elves off of it. 2 mana to get to get 1 ramp is always a good yield and a good return, especially if we're getting deck thinning and deck selection out of it as well. Now, this next one's going to be a bit controversial, so I want to go ahead and let you guys know. This is Persuasive Interrogators. When it enters the battlefield, we create a clue token, but anytime you sacrifice a clue, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. So if we're playing a deck that sacrifices artifacts a lot really easily, and we're playing a deck that can make a lot of clues into the board, this is just a win con. This is just straight up a win con in Clues Matters decks. Decks that just have Academy Manufacturer and aren't even trying to run Clues Matters. This says we sack 5 clues, we kill a person. Flat out. That is all that happens. We pay 10 mana, a person gets deleted off of the board, or we pay less by sacrificing artifacts to a sack outlet. This card is going to close out games the turn you play it, or you're going to get targeted the turn you play it in the decks that it matters in. I think you're going to have a ton of fun when you play this card. You're either going to be able to laugh maniacally as the villain as you burn in hell for your decisions, or you're going to play it and then immediately get at least 1 or 2 people eliminated off of the board, leaving one person to stare at you, wondering how they're going to handle you because they used their removal in the first 5 turns of the game. Then we have the case file Auditor. When this enters the battlefield, or when you solve a case, look at the top 6 of your library, take an enchantment from among them, and put it into your hand. You can spend as mana as though it were any mana of any color to cast case spells. So in a Case Matters deck, this is going to do a lot of work, but even outside of a Case Matters deck, if you're playing a deck that has blink effects in it, this is going to be able to get you tons and tons of enchantments to your hand. Also, just the turn you play it, it's giving you a free card anyway, so it's not going to be the worst thing you play, even if it just gets played once and doesn't do anything else. But I think, again, if you're playing a Case Matters deck, or a deck that can blink it and cares about enchantments on the board, those are going to be the decks that care about this card the absolute most, more than anything else. Abuelo is probably going to do a lot of work with this card. And then finally, we have the Aftermath Analyst. For 2 mana, it enters the battlefield and you mill 3 cards, but you can also sacrifice it to put all lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So I'm just going to say this right now. Finally, we have a non-rare version of Splendid Reclamation. Splendid Reclamation is one of my favorite cards to play at the tail end of a Lands Matters deck, to just get all of my fetch lands back immediately and suddenly get 12 landfall triggers off of it. Aftermath Analyst gives us that ability in spades while also being a creature, so it's easier to repeat this than it is with something like Splendid Reclamation. All we have to do is play this in something like Golgari that can reanimate it. Hell, just make sure that we're getting all of our fetch lands like Escape Tunnel, the cheap ones. Like we're playing budget right now, so you've got Escape Tunnel, you've got Panoramas, you've got all kinds of stuff in your graveyard that is fetching for low cost. You've got the 5 Panoramas, Shire Terrace, you've got Escape Tunnel, you've got Terramorphic Expanse, all of those in the graveyard because we're late in the game. You play Aftermath Analyst, you sacrifice all of those lands after you get them because you're going to wait a turn cycle, but you're going to use something like Feign Death on this. It's going to die, come back immediately, and after you sacrifice all of your lands and get about 8 to 10 landfall triggers with them, meaning your Rampaging Baloth is probably winning you the game already, now suddenly you get to get all those lands back again. Remember, those fetching lands don't have to find lands in your deck to work for you. You can get an Escape Tunnel out, get its landfall trigger, and then let it die to its own effect so that you can play it again and again and again from the graveyard, even when you are out of lands in your deck. If you're playing landfall, this is something you should probably be doing anyway. But I am, as a landfall guy, I'm super excited for Aftermath Analyst. I'm going to be dropping this in a few landfall decks going forward. If red and green Omnath ever drops under $1, you can bet this is going to be in my build of that deck 110% of the time. But with all that said, those are my 10 cards from Karlov Manor that are all budget. They are all under 50 cents. They can fit into just about any budget deck you are playing, and I think every single one of them pulls a ton of weight in the decks that you would play them in. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. What cards are you most excited for out of this set, in or out of budget? I don't care which one it is, but if it's in budget, then I'm more excited about it, because when a card is less than $1, almost everybody has access to the card. And the more people that get to play this game, the more people get to go to third places and work on their mental health. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna be doing a video later about one of the main reasons why we are running with the $15 budget decks. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here. And they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.